So I'd like to go back to my story with Candida. I had severe Candida issues all my life. It started when I was very young. I had a very weak digestion. I don't know how many of you have read the detox diet. I'm very well, thank you, Neha. Um, how many of you have read the detox diet? But in the detox diet, I talk a lot about my own issues with Candida. Um, for starters, I had bleeding piles at the age of 10, which kind of indicated that obviously I had a digestion issue. Being from a Punjabi family, there was copious amounts of sugar, dairy, and meat. I'm from a Punjabi family, and which is the north of India, and there was a significant amount of meat in my diet. So obviously, there was a digestion issue, but there was something more that was going on, which I learned years later, when I finally got onto my path of macrobiotics and trained as a macrobiotic nutritionist. Uh, just remember that you get passed on all your microorganisms or bacteria. The foundation of it is pretty much laid when you are delivered in a normal birth. So in retrospect, when I go back and look at my mother's history, my mother had a fair amount of Candida herself because she's had it all her life and she's never addressed it. She's always been a sugar consumer. I hate painting my mother in a bad light, but that's just the truth. And years later, I realized that she had already set me up with a weaker gut pretty much when I was born, right? So I was carrying it while I was born and, while I came into the world. And, I started developing all these digestion issues and carried constipation for very long. And every doctor that I visited told me that you know, I needed to have more milk and would give me, milk of magnesia and isabgol and all, psyllium husk and all those things. Nothing rectified, and then sooner or later, as I, started going into my adult years, I started getting a lot of thrush infections, which women will understand, which happens to us when we get chronic UTIs and stuff like that. I sought homeopathy at that time, and my homeopath told me that listen, it's psychosomatic and it's stress related. Which also I kind of said, okay, fine. I was still doing market research at the time, so my focus on health and health related issues was there, but it wasn't as high and as heightened as I am today. Finally, my dad gets cancer, and then I land up at the Kushi Institute to study, and bang, I realized that listen, when I got diagnosed by my counselor that I have severe Candida, I was severely bloated and I had a lot of mental fuzziness. And these are the symptoms of Candida. Candida, basically, let's go back. What is Candida? It's the overgrowth of a particular microorganism, which is like a yeast or a fungi, which kind of is left in your system, and it makes you feel sluggish, bloated, all the symptoms I had at the time: sluggish, bloated, mentally fuzzy, water retained, really thick in certain areas of the body, like the waist, allergies, migraine headaches. I used to get them all the time. Uh, Prone to depression, a lot of anxiety and worry, and a white coated tongue, and in extreme cases, chronic fatigue, depression. So I was carrying all of this, and when I landed up at the Kushi Institute to study and I started my course, I did my evaluation pretty much like you guys now come and consult me in the first month. And what came about and what I realized was that I have severe Candida. And when I asked my and this was always exacerbated or got worse when I started eating foods from the outside, which triggered it off. So typically, yeasted foods would trigger it off, sugary foods would trigger, and I was doing everything at that time. I was doing dairy, I was doing sugar, I was doing, I wasn't a meat eater anymore because I'd quit meat, but I was doing a lot of stuff, processed, refined, maida, whatever, refined flour, which is refined flour, and every time I had these foods, it would trigger it off, and there was this reaction, and I would go into a thrush infection, right? When I say thrush infection, I mean profused itching. Uh, I don't need to tell you, women, and I don't need to specify for guys out here. It kept coming back. And my gynecologist started addressing it with topical medication, which is Fluzone and Flucazone and all that. So he was trying to address it topically. My homeopath was addressing it psychosomatically, and no one was addressing it internally. Now, for Candida to go, it has to be addressed internally, because one of the things, and I was in a systemic candidiasis situation. What does that mean? When Candida starts migrating out of your gut lining and starts escaping that particular part of the body and gets into your system, then it's pretty much spreading like a carpet all over any passage that it gets. Okay, and I was pretty much full blown by then, and no one was addressing me internally. So finally, my macrobiotic counselor, God bless her, Lucy Baranda, she's no more, took me under her wing. And when I asked her, I said, Lucy, how long is it going to take? Because I was also suffering on an immune system front, right? So she said, listen, it's going to take you, I can't say how long, but I know this, that the day you're rid of it, you're going to get rid of it permanently, because you would have strengthened your immunity. And I was studying in Australia at the time. I was between America and Australia, so I got enough time to practice what I was learning at the macrobiotic school. So I went off to Australia, and I started, of course, wanting to be my own guinea pig, wanting to get out of this Candida situation. Went to Australia, was doing my yoga Pilates course at that time, and started cooking the macrobiotic food. So this is my journey in Candida, and because I was able to knock it off 2 years later, I feel it's a very important journey to share. A couple of things also helped me. I think the fact that I was doing Ayurvedic Panchakarma at that time also really helped me, and that really worked for me as well. So I was doing Ayurvedic Panchakarma cleansing at one end, I was doing my foods at one end, and both those disciplines really helped me to get back into balance. So that's my story. Now, what did it do for me at that time? One of the things it does is it inhibits the absorption of nutrients, okay, because it's in your gut. It's and specifically it's inhibiting amino acids, so protein absorption gets affected, okay, and practically all the nutrients that you're eating, right? So how do you know you have it? Again, I'd like to go back to the symptoms. There's a bit of mental fuzziness, there's lethargy, there's bloatedness in your system, there is anxiety and worry, which doesn't help. I was in that situation at the time. Allergies, you could be, if it's very severe, prone to depression. So these are the signs. You're not being able to lose your weight. This is all Candida related, okay? So basically now we come to, well, if I have Candida, then what do I avoid, right? So one of the things that really feeds it and multiplies it is raw foods, and that's a shocker. Excessive salt, sugar, of course, feeds it. Any kind of sugar. So I'm talking about no honey, no jaggery, no agave, no malt, no nothing which is sugary, okay? Maida triggers it, which is a refined white flour. Then dairy triggers it, okay? Animal foods trigger it because they create an acidic condition in the system, okay? And anything processed and refined, okay? Stevia won't trigger it, but any other sweetener that you're on will trigger it. And the worst trigger is antibiotics. So antibiotics really trigger Candida in a really major way, okay? So you've got to be careful of antibiotics, because antibiotics are going to really trigger and kill the good and the bad, and you're supposed to have a neutral system inside you of microorganisms, good, bad, and neutral, to balance your flora, internal flora and ecosystem. So that wasn't happening to me at the time, okay? The other thing that would trigger it would be excessive white carbs. The whole grain carbs are good, because just remember, one of the strongest things that the macrobiotic lineage proposes is having a whole grain or a whole legume. So if because it believes that when the skin is intact, the nutrients are in the skin, okay, and that's really important. So 20% of your diet can have a whole grain, okay? So I won't take you off or brown rice completely, but I would definitely minimize the carb load, because that's where the sugars are coming from, and that's where candida is getting fed. Nothing yeasted, so no wines during this time, no breads, commercial breads which are coming in with yeast in them. Sourdough is okay, but again, I'm going to talk about how fermented foods come into play. Minimize your processed and refined flour consumption. Have light foods, lightly cooked foods. Something like a Indian khichdi works really well. Miso soups work really well. But again, on the fermented food spectrum with candida, you may be histamine intolerant, which means you may not have the ability to absorb fermented food, so you have to play around with them. However, having said that, the best thing that works for candida is a good sauerkraut, is a good beet kvass, is not a kombucha. Okay, because that's going to trigger it, because it does have a fair amount of sugar in it, some amount of sugar in it. So you're supposed to go more towards like a salted, like not excessively salted, check the sodium levels. But beet kvass is around, kanji is around, make it at home. You can do that. And one of the foods that some amount of vegetable consumption, which is about 40% of your diet, focuses on it. Get in the greens, because chlorophyll really helps candida. Get in the sprouts really helps with candida cleansing. Okay, so make sure your diet is rich on it. And of course, lentils and legumes, you should focus on it about 10 to 15% of your diet. And if you're gonna have a fruit, my suggestion is you stew it. So the best fruit that stewed for me at that time was apples. So I'd have a whole grain brown rice porridge, and it's in my IGTV if you want to see the recipe. I was having it in the mornings, and that worked really well for me. But I was off everything that was yeasted, so no glasses of wine, no sugar in my diet. And I did this religiously and stuck to it for 2 years. No outside processed foods, nothing refined. If I went out, I ate really carefully. I focused more on the vegetables. I didn't have raw. And this is what really got me through it. My consumption of carbs came down to about 25%, 20 to 25%. And I was doing the good carbs. I was doing brown rice, and I was doing millets, and I was doing buckwheat. Okay, I had gone off gluten at that time. So that really helped. And one of the foods that really helps with candida is garlic, because garlic is antibacterial, antifungal. In fact, a lot of our macrobiotic remedies also suggest, TCM remedies suggest taking the garlic and looping it like a tampon, and actually inserting it if you have a vaginal issue with a blow up of candidiasis. It really helps. So that also really helps. I even did something at that time called sit baths. We sit ourselves in dried mooli leaves. So you take radish and you dry out the leaves. And when you dry out the leaves, I remember this used to be a joke with my Australian landlady who I lived with, who's now a dear friend, Donna, that I used to keep drying my leaves, and I used to stink up her kitchen. And then we would boil the leaves, and then I'd make a sit bath, and I'd sit hip downward in a tub for 20 minutes, and a lot of detoxing happens and sweating happens, and you wrap yourself with a towel. It's really a healing time. I used to do that 2-3 times a week. Another thing, if women have excessive candidiasis and it's manifesting in vaginitis and stuff like that, then you can also do a douche of vinegar. Okay, use a good quality vinegar like an apple cider vinegar. That really helps. But it's, candida has different manifestations for different people. It's not the same across the board. So I'm talking about what I did, because that was my manifestation. You'll have to check what the way you are manifesting it. Okay, the other thing is that just remember, when it becomes full blown, that's when degeneration of diseases that's when degenerative diseases like cancers and stuff start happening to you. So happening, not to you specifically, but happening. So a patient who has cancer has full blown candidiasis in most scenarios. Similarly, with any ailment that affects the immune system in a very big way, that's what's happening. And the other thing that it's going to do for you is it's definitely going to attack your immune system 100%. It's going to weaken your immunity, because as I said, that there's lack of absorption. So when you're saying that there's lack of absorption, obviously all your nutrients are not being absorbed, and it's going to definitely affect your immune system. Okay. So now let's come down to so what are the so I've told you the foods that will work. I've told you the foods that will not work. For example, any sugary drink, cola drink. I was very used to having diet cokes at that time. That didn't work for me. I had to get rid of it, and I'm rid of it permanently. So I pretty much went cold turkey. You have to decide how you want to shift to a healthier lifestyle to get rid of it. Okay. It's a long journey. It's not a very short journey. It takes a humongous amount of time. It took me 2 years, but it was like knocking out something really that I was suffering from for like 7, 8 years of my life. Okay. So it was really great when I finally knocked it out, because finally, when I knocked it out, I could consume all those things without them affecting me so much, because my immunity had really strengthened to take it. One of you. Now let's come down to how it affects the immunity. Okay, Candida will, like I said, affect your immunity because there's a fair amount of, you're already in a state of acidic blood condition. Your pH is already off. There's a lot of stuff going on with your cells. They've kind of lost their, as we in macrobiotics say, key energy. Candida is fueled with on an emotional front with anxiety and worry, and it kind of the liver is the organ of anger. This is how we analyze in macrobiotics. So Candida is going to stagnate your liver and therefore stagnate blood condition, because liver processes all your blood. So we need to get rid of anxiety and worry, and only foods, setting the foundation for foods, will help you get rid of the anxiety and worry, and then release your liver and release all that anger. So a lot of forgiveness, a lot of letting go, a lot of gratitude, a lot of attitude of gratitude at this point in time when you're working with Candida, because Candida is kind of like an indication that you're holding on to things. So it's a lot of healing on a lot of fronts. Okay. And free radical damage is something that you have to avoid in excess. Some amount of free radical damage is needed. Some amount of free radicals are needed because hydrogen peroxide happens, and that's eating up some amount of bad fungi and stuff in microorganisms in your system. But excess free radical damage is going to cause your cells to weaken and stagnate your cell condition, and oxidation happens, and therefore that's going to affect your immunity eventually. So like I said, you're supposed to do a couple of things to help with that. Is, of course, balance your diet, and also exercise, because at this point in time you need a lot of oxygen. Your cells need oxygen, so pranayamic breathing techniques, movement, lots of oxygen, green plants, very important. And of course, to sum it all up, okay, to give you to avoid this free radical damage, lot of activity, balancing your diet, supplementing. Like I said, at this point in time, it's very important to have to lean on a seaweed like a spirulina, because that's going to bring in plenty of chlorophyll and going to take your green consumption up. The liver loves greens. The liver wants to release anger at this point in time, so you're supposed to feed the liver greens. Up your sprout consumption at this time, because that's going to really help. And have an attitude of gratitude. Okay, that's going to really help. So I can take some questions now if you'd like, any of you, because I've kind of finished my discussion. I've gone through it really quick because I have a meeting to go to, but you can let me know if you have any questions. Madhu says, please talk about Candida after medicinal steroids. So like I said, Candida is not just medicinal steroids have also destroyed it, but I've kind of laid the foundation for you, Madhu, in the talk about how to go about getting rid of it. It's going to take time. The worst thing you can do is get onto more antibiotics. So you have to get rid of these medicinal steroids that you're on. It's very important to get rid of Candida. Yeah. There's a detailed section in my detox diet book on Candida and how to work with it. So I suggest all of you, if you can, try and get onto it, because that really helps you. That book will really help you. The body's pH can be found out through a urine test or a blood test, Anu. but more often than not, it's more about just remember your body has amazing conversations with you. So you're supposed to listen to your body talk. Yeah, more often than not, we don't do that. We are kind of sitting and just living our lives and habitually, and we don't listen to what our body has to say to us. If the body gives you a headache, if the body throws up a pimple, if the body throws up an imbalanced bowel movement, these are all signs that your body is trying to tell you that, listen, something's wrong. And if you're having it on a recurrent basis, it's even worse, because the body is trying to tell you, listen, something's really wrong and you're not paying attention. Okay? So start listening to those conversations. And the way to listen to those conversations is to be more in tune with the way you eat, because only the way you eat is going to sort that head out of yours. And when you have that head sorted, you're going to have this amazing amount of key energy which you're going to beat and pulsate with, and that's going to bring in a fair amount of awareness and groundedness to be in tune with your body and to intuitively know what's wrong. Okay, I hope I've answered that well. And anything else, guys? Because I'll end the live. If I hope it's been helpful for you. It's great seeing you. Some of you really tune in and really listen to what I have to say. I'm in deep gratitude for that. I hope I'm able to help you in some way with these lives, and I hope it spurs you to read a book or read an article, or start at least getting rid of some foods which are causing problems. Okay, so I'm gonna say bye now, and thank you so much for being and participating in this session with me. And good luck. Have a great day. Have a great evening. Bye.